I'd like to welcome you to our online presentation today with Natural Habitat Adventures, Alaska, Bears, and Beyond. This is part of our new webinar series for 2013 called Wildlife Webinars. And we will be offering a series of these, the next one January 22nd, and then in February we will have one on the first and third Tuesday of that month from 3 to 4, and we will be sure to invite you to those. But today we are joined by Eric Rock, and Eric's role as Natural Habitat Adventures Head Naturalist not only allows him to lead a wide range of adventures around the world, but also to play an essential role in improving existing trips and developing new ones. His illustrious career began in Alaska in 1989, where he worked as a field researcher on many of the state's diverse animal species, including river otters, waterfowl, moose, and reindeer. He also served as the head naturalist at the Kantishna Roadhouse Lodge in Denali National Park. And his involvement in many of Natural Habitat Adventures North American destinations includes Alaska, British Columbia, Churchill, Canyons, and Yosemite. And he's been an integral part of the continued success and popularity and his participation in more exotic adventures like Bhutan and Papua New Guinea. So he is a well-rounded individual. When he's not guiding for Natural Habitat, he works as a freelance documentary photographer, and that's what you're going to get to enjoy today, his beautiful photography along with his knowledge of Alaska. So welcome, Eric.
Hey, thank you, Lee. You know, I love having you do my introductions like that. It saves me a lot of time. It's hard to talk about yourself, and I feel like I owe you $20 every time you do that for me, so thank you very much. Hello and welcome, fellow wildlife enthusiasts and nature travelers. I hope there's some people out there today that I've had the pleasure of traveling with at some place in time in the world. And I welcome a chance to spend some time with some new potential travelers, or if you guys just have a chance to run into me somewhere online or out in the bigger world, please pull me aside and say hello and let's have a chat, okay? I've got a bigger goal today is talk about one of my favorite places, a place that was my backyard for, well, I quit counting at 20 years, and I still have the opportunity to go back and lead trips and explore. And so I'm going to be sharing that area with you today, primarily talking about the wildlife and the experiences through the Natural Habitat Ultimate Alaska Wildlife Safari and the Ultimate Grizzlies Kodiak to Katmai. So let's go ahead and start talking about that. The view you see right now is not a common view. It's a clear view from Wonder Lake of Mount McKinley. The name we usually give it in Alaska is Denali. It's the Athabasca name for the high one there. You can see off in the distance on the right, the highest peak there. And then the Alaska Range sprawling out to the east. This is a view that you might get maybe 20% of the summer. And we'll talk more about that, how to increase your chances of seeing a view like this in a place like Denali or Alaska as we travel along. Now, I imagine some people online today have had the opportunity to travel to Alaska, maybe on a cruise up through Southeast or through Prince William Sound, or maybe one of the more secluded cruises through the Bering Sea, possibly overland doing a bus tour, or maybe if you're lucky enough to get a little bit deeper into Alaska on a river trip, hiking trip, backcountry trip somewhere to a remote lodge. So hopefully this information complements what you've had a chance to experience. And if you haven't had an opportunity, maybe help line out some more things you might look to experiencing on a trip to Alaska. So let's go ahead and kind of explore this a little bit more. So this is not necessarily the type of trip you would get, type of experience you'd get from the deck of a cruise ship. Okay, so let's go ahead and explore a little bit more into talking about what Alaska is. Now this is kind of an overwhelming kind of map / aerial photo of what Alaska would look like. And I just put it up here for one main reason. To give you an idea, it's a big place. Alaska, with over 656,000 square miles of surface area, is a tremendous place. How in the world do you start to get a handle on that? Then you start looking at things like, you know, coastline alone. You're looking at 33,000 miles of coastline if you count the islands and the islets and rocks and spires that stick up out of the ocean. So give you an idea of coastline. Where do you start exploring the coast, let alone the landscape? What if you're interested in rivers? Over 3,000 rivers in Alaska. There are over 3 million lakes, at least 20 acres or greater. That's not counting the little ponds and little places you might find secluded back in the backcountry and other places. So it's a big place with very few roads. And fortunately, in many cases, very few people, with only 630+ thousand people in Alaska. It gives you a lot of places and a lot of open areas to explore. Let's go ahead and take off with that. Now I'm going to leave this map and go to one that might be a little bit easier to read and help out with everybody on that side. So let's go ahead and talk about where do you begin to explore. Well, I already mentioned a lot of people tend to do the cruises where they cruise down along. You should be able to see my mouse here down through the southeastern archipelago of islands from a cruise ship or maybe a smaller cruise or a small charter boat. There's also Prince William Sound. And then maybe even exploring out along the Aleutians and up through the Bering Sea. But I'm not going to talk about that so much right now because most of my experience with traveling in the heart of Alaska and in these three main areas I'm going to cover are in the interior, road-based, and then some coastal stuff, and I'll explain that here as we go. So I'll give you an idea of what we're going to talk about. First off, we're going to explore the interior of Alaska through Denali National Park. Let me see if I can bring my cursor up here. Starting in Fairbanks, we'll go down through Denali. Then the second part of our experience, we'll talk about this place and what it means, and then work our way down to the coast and cruise out of Seward, explore around this area of the coastline, and I do have some better maps to show you this up in detail. After that second experience of exploring the riches of Alaska's coastline with Kenai Fjords National Park, we'll scoot back to Anchorage and then step off and fly off to King Salmon to get into Katmai National Park here on the coast. And I actually have Katmai National Park is a place, if you may have already been there or may have heard about it, it's a place if you want a brown bear, a coastal brown bear experience, it's really hard to find anything better anywhere else in the world. So we're going to kick off some exploring and talking about bears a little bit more depth when we get out to Katmai. And then I'll take you back to Kodiak and for another adventure that Natural Habitat does and how some people might consider exploring the coastline of Katmai National Park. And I'll give you a pretty good idea of what we're going to be exploring here over the course of the trip, and I'll go through it and then maybe kind of summarize that at the end. So let's go ahead. Before I continue on with photographs, actually let's go ahead and we'll move on. A quick note about the photographs. Lee already mentioned that a lot of photographs here are mine. Some of the photographs I pulled in other guides might have taken, especially if it was a picture of me guiding or another guide, something like that. I might pull that in for our slideshow today, as well as a few travelers have had. And I always encourage travelers on our trips, and especially my trips, to add some photos to our slideshows, and I try to bring those whenever I can and bring them to the table so people can experience basically the same photography I can do out there on the trip or any of our travelers can do. And that's one of the rewards of going to Alaska is the amazing opportunity not just to watch wildlife and see the scenery, but to photograph it as well. And all the natural habitat guides take great pride in helping the travelers, kind of get that part of the experience under their belt while they're exploring around Alaska. So let's go ahead and talk about Denali. Now, Denali is a place of great landscapes. That's a pretty easy one. I can't think of a better place in the world to get a sense of where a landscape goes on and on and on. Just when you think it's given up, you go around the corner and there's something else. Like this photograph of a rainbow over top the Denali Park Road. And let's go ahead and talk about how we explore those landscapes a little bit more when we talk about the Denali experience. Our trips start in Fairbanks, make their way down, and we spend a good part of the trip exploring the interior of Alaska, and the best way to do that is through Denali National Park and Preserve. And how do we do that? Well, we take this 92-mile drive. If you can see my cursor here, this is a map of Denali National Park. Take a 92-mile drive, the whole length of the park road, back here to, it's often referred to as Little Village of Kantishna. It's basically just a little collection of lodges, remote lodges here, deep in the heart of the park and preserve, not far from that photograph of Wonder Lake I showed you with Denali here, and Mount McKinley showing up right in the foreground or right in the background. So this is an ultimate safari. In fact, if I could tell you, there's no better place in Alaska to get a sense for the large landscape from a comfortable perspective of a vehicle traveling this road, this safari route, back into the park. But also, over the years, the wildlife has become habituated to it. In fact, that they don't even bother to run away from the vehicles in most cases. As long as people behave respectfully from the vehicles, you get great wildlife viewing. And because 80% of the park is above tree line or timber line, you have magnificent vistas with opportunities to see that wildlife you wouldn't normally have a chance to in other places in Alaska. And also, you see the red part of the line here, the map, that's basically a cutoff point where private traffic is no longer allowed past that point, and access to the deeper part of the park is through shuttle bus or private transfer to the lodges back here in the Kantishna region of the park. And that's one of our goals, is to spend a few days back here in Kantishna so we have a chance to get a real sense for what this area is about. And let's go ahead and explore on a little bit more. So the best way to transfer back into the park is on one of the private buses. It's kind of like a safari rig. They're school buses, and you hear about, oh, you travel back in on school buses. Well, the school buses that private lodges use have been, what do I say, they've been kind of built up, made a little bit more comfortable with the most comfortable seats they can put in. But most importantly, one of my favorite features are the large windows that open up for photography and just watching wildlife. And here's the Kantishn Roadhouse bus sitting at one of the rest areas on the way in. So in a 90-mile drive, the safari takes at least 5.5 hours to make the trip back to Kantishn. And the drivers are all excellent naturalists that work with us, help us find wildlife. And from this perspective, you sit up a little bit higher than maybe the brushy vegetation along the road. It can be one of the best opportunities to find wildlife, like moose, looking for moose in this grand landscape. Probably one of my favorite places to photograph and see moose are in Denali National Park, mainly because of the vistas and the surroundings and the backdrops for them. But also, I know that these animals make their living in this landscape, not just during a short, intense summer when they're actually able to put on the weight and the resources they need to make it through the long, cold winter, but it's a beautiful area to watch them and make their living. Now, there are other places around Alaska. You might go to the airport around Anchorage, or maybe you're out late in the evening around Fairbanks. You might see a moose wandering through town, but nothing is more magnificent than seeing a moose in Denali National Park. Also, you know, the caribou herds around Alaska can be a little bit more difficult to find and get a good look at, but the smaller herd in Denali National Park, there's a little over 2,000 animals maybe that call Denali National Park home. And these animals are a little bit more approachable, a little bit more visible in this landscape, so it does give you opportunities to watch them as well and learn a little bit about how they make a living in their landscape. And the one animal that helped Denali National Park become a national park, the Dall sheep, North America's only white sheep, probably one of the best opportunities in the world to see these guys in their natural habitat as well. And I can't think of a better way to spend a day at one of the high mountain passes and glassing hillsides looking for these animals grazing across this extremely remote landscape. Also, I think anytime you go to Alaska, one animal that comes to mind is the grizzly bear. Black bears too, grizzly bears, and if you're up in the far north, polar bears. But in Denali, I think one of the choice animals to spend time watching and learning about their landscape is through the eyes of a grizzly bear. Here, this little female kind of posing just off the side of the trail or off the side of the road is a great opportunity to photograph, but also watch and learn. And here, over the years, we watched this bear grow up, and again, pays very little attention to the vehicle going by, as well as kind of feeling comfortable without that, with the road being that close. As long as people behave respectfully, it can be a great opportunity to just sit and watch and learn. And we're going to talk more about grizzly bears or brown bears here as we travel on through the landscape. But I think something to include in your thoughts of traveling to Alaska, or where you're going to stay, that's very important. There are a lot of really good places to stay in Alaska. To get remote, though, there aren't as many places. So we have to spend a little bit of time in understanding that in remote locations like this, you're looking for the most comfortable accommodations which give you access to the scenery, give you access to the wildlife. And so that's a constant balancing act. Here in Denali, using the Kantishn Roadhouse, very comfortable place. It's not the fanciest place in the world, but it is smack right dab in the middle of all this wilderness. So for people going to Denali, finding a good lodge back in the park where you're right in the middle of the park, surrounded by the wilderness, close access to the wildlife and the viewing, and places like Kantishn Roadhouse kind of capitalize on that. So we look forward to developing relationships with these lodges so you guys can have a chance to go out and spend time there, but it also keeps you close to where things happen. For instance, if the clouds clear on one of those days where you might have that chance at that 20% opportunity of seeing Denali, this would be one of the places you'd want to be, because you're very close to a good view, just right up the trail, right up the road. You could get into a good view of Denali or Mount McKinley right from there. So keeping that in mind. A lot of times your fanciest accommodations aren't where they won't be found where the wildlife is or the best scenery. You might have to go into more remote locations. And we really do an incredible job of searching out the most comfortable accommodations for those experiences. And it's a constant balancing act, but we're always out there working for you to do that. Now, it's when you get back into the heart of the park. Most people go into the park, they take a tour in for a couple hours one day, tour back out for a couple hours the same day. They don't get a chance to spend some time there. And I've had people that have come to me afterwards say, oh, I went to Denali, but you know what, I didn't see a whole lot that particular trip. I missed a lot. It was rainy, it was cloudy. Well, by going in and spending some time, you increase your opportunities for the weather to change, to get out and learn the landscape a little bit more, see more, have more opportunities to see things, and at the same time, get out on the ground with a guide. See what makes Denali tick, you know, those long, cold winters of the interior of Alaska, the boreal forest. Have an influence on the landscape by getting out on the trails, getting down into the vegetation, looking close for the wildlife, the flowers. You get an opportunity to learn what this landscape is all about. For instance, tall Jacob's ladder. If you're out on a trail with me, I'll tell you how when I see this particular flower each year, this is going to be my favorite sign of when summer has arrived, when I see this one blooming. You can look at a calendar to tell you when summer's arrived. For me, I look at aspects to landscape, and tall Jacob's ladder is one of those aspects to landscape. That's my official first day of summer when I see this flower blooming. So let's also the relationships from one species to the other. By getting on the ground, you can start to understand the relationship of a beautiful flower like the frigid arnica and the Arctic bumblebee, and how they play a bigger role in this landscape as well. And the best way to do that, again, is spending some time in Denali, a couple days out on the trail, learning a little bit about it with your hands in it, your body in it, and exploring a little bit closer and getting a real sense for what it's about. So with this little snowshoe hare sitting alongside the trail, let's go ahead and let's run along and talk about our transition down to another area, and the second experience on our journey here. As we travel back, let's see, we'll start out here at Denali National Park, Kantishna, make our way back to Denali Park. And what we're going to do is we're going to make our way down to the coast for our second experience. And on the way, we're going to do a stop in Girdwood for a couple nights. I won't talk too much about the details of that, but we stay at a nice hotel, Alyeska Prince Hotel, little whitewater, our little rafting experience on the Spencer River, and up along the Spencer Glacier, get a chance to photograph and see some icebergs in that lake. And then what we'll do is we'll make our way down here to the coastal experience, this coastal rainforest, and also the coastline of Kenai Fjords National Park. And I do have another map to show you that a little bit closer, but I just wanted to point out, you know, the bigger picture from this one. So let's go ahead. Probably one of my favorite ways to travel from Denali down to the coast is traveling down towards the Anchorage area on the Alaska Railroad. It gives you an opportunity to kick back in comfort, actually quite luxurious comfort, have lunch and watch the landscape kind of scooting by as you travel down through the Alaska Range and down into the Matanuska Valley, which was where we'll depart that and continue our journey down to the coast. So the Alaska Road, if you've had a chance to travel, you know what I'm talking about. We travel Gold Star service, a great way to see the landscape, and constantly watching for wildlife even along the way. So we get down to the coast now. We've left the boreal forest, that cold forest that is dominated by winter, and we've entered another area, much more lush rainforest, the temperate rainforest, as we refer to it. And there, life has a little bit different feel to it. It's much richer. You can actually smell the life as you get down on the coast. You can smell the richness of the ocean. And, you know, who would ever thought? When I first moved to Alaska, my family thought I was moving to a place of icebergs and igloos. They didn't really have a concept of what, you know, Alaska is really about. And to stand along the coastline in Alaska and experience it, you know, we have orchids here, like this bog orchid, as well as many other wildflowers. You know, it's a pretty rich place, especially down here along the coast. So every time I travel to the coast, I learn and I see more. So let's go ahead down. We end up down here in Seward, and from Seward, we take a boat out, we transfer out to Fox Island. We spend a couple of nights on Fox Island. Fox Island, sitting right outside Kenai Fjords National Park, has a wonderful, comfortable little lodge, eco lodge, right here on the island. And from here, we can get out and explore along one of Alaska's richest coastlines. And that's what we're going to talk about now. We usually do a day trip. Takes us out, weather permitting. We can get around the Cape, back into Adak Bay, up the Holgate Arm, looking for different things, wildlife, as well as the landscape. So let's talk about that now. And there is nothing more diverse. If I'd had to pick one area of Alaska that showed the diversity of landscape and wildlife to really share with people, even though this is a land-based tour, if we were to spend a full day out on the water, where could we get the most wildlife, the most observations, the most photographs, and the most insight into Alaska's coastline? I'd have to pick Kenai Fjords National Park for that opportunity. And there's no better way than on a small vessel with just our group, where we can get in close and see Alaska up close and personal from the water level. Here, just one of the groups viewing a small pod of orcas moving along the rugged coastline. I think you can get a sense for the scale of things here just from this one shot. But I've got a few more up my sleeve. to share with you. Also, it's a chance to see some of our wildlife that maybe we didn't get a chance to see while we're up in the park. Some of the more coastal species. Once in a while we might get a bald eagle and denali. Down here, they're almost everywhere. Also, some of the small birds that call the coastline home because of the access to resources just off the coast. We get all the alcids like the murres, the thick-billed common murres. We get kittiwakes. We also get puffins, horned puffins, but also tufted puffins like this one here. And using a small boat like this will allow you to get in close to the rocks for more intimate views on a fairly large-scale, rugged coastline, something very difficult to do unless you're really good with ropes or small skiffs and bouncing around on a rough sea. These boats give you the best opportunity to get in close and get opportunities to view and photograph birds like this. But not only birds, but you also have a chance for critters like sea otters. Probably, I can't think of a biologist I know that doesn't have a little soft spot in their heart for these furry creatures, making their living on this extremely rugged and exposed coastline. I still find it amazing that life can exist in this kind of a furry form and still make a living off this landscape in such a way. And so any chance I get a chance to photograph them, I definitely take opportunity to do that. But also there are other marine mammals too that call this coastline home. Stellar sea lions. There's also harbor seals. Sometimes the Dall's porpoises will perform for us. So we're always exploring, looking for other animals. Some of the, well, when I say that on the grand scale, some of the ones we're always keeping an eye out, and I know myself, the captains or the skippers of the vessel and the first mates always have our eyes on the landscape for a chance to pick up maybe a pod or a single traveling orca in this case. But also, we're always on the outlook for the larger feeders, the larger animals that come into the Resurrection Bay, the Kenai Fjords area to feed on the wealth of resources, humpback whales. And on occasion, there are other whales, but these are the whales that we're really out there scouring and looking and spending time, hopefully with a chance to come across them. So again, it's this wealth of resources along the coastline that's able to feed this food chain where we get all these different animals from the small birds feeding on the krill and the small fishes that feed on them to the larger mammals, the marine mammals, seals, sea lions, whales. It's a magnificent place. And I always enjoy sitting in the lodge after coming back from a day out on the water and going through all the different species we saw, and people realize how many different bird species. We're talking about the kittiwakes, you're talking about the auklets, you're talking about the eagles, and all of a sudden the species start adding up. Then you get into marine mammals. You see far more marine mammals in a short bit of time, usually, than most places in the world, right here in the coastline of Alaska. So also, another little bonus, if the weather allows us and we can make it out around the Cape and we get a chance to get up close and personal with some of Alaska's more famous tidewater glaciers, like the Holgate Glacier here. But each trip's a little bit is different, no matter whether you're talking about the interior or down along the coast. So things are constantly changing. But any chance we get to get those boats out around the Cape to experience the glaciers, we definitely take advantage of it. From this level, in these small boats, we can get in usually within a half a mile from the face of those glaciers for an incredible view of the drama that sometimes ensues when you're this close to a magnificent frozen river of ice making its way down off the Harding ice field. Here, a big calving event on the glacier itself sends up the kittiwakes and gulls into the air as they scurry around looking for food that might have been stunned by that calving glacier. Also, it's an opportunity from those small boats to get out and explore the more intimate side of things. Hear the soft, subtle sounds of the gas being released from the bergy bits and the icebergs as they drift around your boat as you're sitting there in the bay. And then if I highly encourage for people while we're staying on Fox Island, get out and get a sense for what the ocean is about, what the Alaska coastline is about, from the safety and comfort of a modern watercraft like a sea kayak. Very stable boats, very easy for people to get around, and a great chance to get down at a level that very few people have a chance to experience when traveling around Alaska. And boy, I highly encourage that, and I look forward to every opportunity to get out on the water. And now that we start leaving the coastline here as this black bear leaves and walks up, probably scavenge along the shoreline near the island, looking for maybe a dead fish or some marine products that washed up on the beach, starts making his way back up into the forest. Let's go ahead and start making our way back from a couple of days here, from a couple of days down here along the Kenai Peninsula, the Kenai Fjords area. Let's make our way back to Anchorage because this is going to allow us a chance to regroup, repack, and go into our third experience, which is learning more and experience more about coastal brown bears. And we're going to talk about two different areas for this, but both of those areas are going to be in Katmai National Park. The first one is we're going to fly out by charter plane to King Salmon. And then from King Salmon, we're going to fly to another area just outside, about 30 miles out. And we're going to go to Brooks Lodge area for Brooks Falls and that concentration of brown bears there. So let's go ahead and continue on a little bit with our travels. As you fly out, if it's a clear day and you're flying out along the Peninsula Mountains, you get wonderful views of some of Alaska's most volcanic terrain, sometimes flying right over top of a smoldering volcano. This is Mountain St. Augustine. It's a volcano. It's like almost like a tropical island volcano right in the middle of the bay there. If you take a look out, it's a beautiful place. Not every day do we see this because this is a part of the coastline that's often enshrouded in clouds. So to have an opportunity to fly over the mountains like this in that scheduled flight is an amazing opportunity. Then, once we get to King Salmon, we board our small little float plane or seaplane or bush plane, whatever you want to call it, and that aircraft actually transfers us out to Brooks Lodge. And that is probably, I put it in the top 3 brown bear viewing opportunities in the world for good reason. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that now. Now let's go back to our map here. Here's where we landed on our scheduled flight, King Salmon, and from here our bush flight takes us out to Brooks Camp. And that allows us within a mile walk access to probably one of the more famous views for experiencing and viewing brown bears anywhere in the world. And that's the concentration of brown bears that it can gather at the Brooks Falls area. Here, I think you're probably, if you looked around, you could probably count at least 12, 13 bears feeding in different areas. There might be some up under the bushes even we can't see in this view. But this is a view from the platforms that were constructed there. As salmon are migrating in through the Bristol Bay, through the saltwater ecosystem, up through the Naknek River and Naknek Lake, they make it into the 1 mile long Brooks River. And those fish get held up for a while by the Brooks Falls here. And eventually they have to make their way and jump up over top of the falls. And that's where the bears are sitting and waiting for them. As the salmon are gathering up, this is kind of like the table is being set. And this is the opportunity for the bears to start making their living off this landscape. And then once the salmon start jumping, the bears that are waiting, they could catch them right at the top of the falls, like in the case of this female, or they might catch stunned fish as they fall back into the water and they're recovering. The bears sitting down below the falls may have a chance to grab an easy meal as well. What's amazing is some of these bears, the more successful ones, they figure they can gather up to 20,000 kilocalories of food each day, making a living off this river ecosystem just for a short period of time. And we'll talk a little bit more about timing of the trips and how that comes into play with Brooks Lodge a little bit later. So being here for the salmon is an important time of year for the bears to make their living, because this is really their opportunity to put on weight and get ready for winter. With the short summers of Alaska, this is probably one of the golden opportunities for them to gather up their resources and make a living off this landscape. Now, so when things are good, everybody does well. You know, all the bears are feeding, even the little cubs, like in this case. Just viewing from a platform, one of the mothers, one of the females, feels very, very safe being close to the platform, and she has a chance to just kind of kick back and suckle her cub while the rest of life goes on, completely ignoring people on the platform. The bears have gotten so used to people, as long as they behave respectfully there, they go about their business, whether it's fishing for salmon or suckling their young, or when they're finally tuckered out and their bellies are full, maybe even taking a nap close by the platform, like this particular bear just falling asleep in the river itself. I've been pretty tired before. You know, I've been tired doing biology. I've been tired out traveling, doing natural history trips. I've been very tired, but I don't know if I've ever been quite tired enough yet to fall asleep on a rock in the middle of the river. But I got to hand it to you. It must be good living for a bear when all those salmon are coming back into the ecosystem. So we covered a little bit about, you know, the experience there, you know, being out at Brooks Falls, you know, that staying at Brooks Lodge, nice comfortable lodging. It's more dormitory style, 4 beds or bunks to each cabin. And then doing that walk, it's a relatively level walk up to the falls each day to stay on the platform to watch the bears from one of the platforms there at the falls or just below the falls. And let's go ahead and explore another opportunity, which I think I would have to say is a little bit deeper excursion into Alaska. And what we're going to do is, after our trip out to Brooks Lodge. We're going to fly back, make our way back to Anchorage. And then for people who want it, I know Natural Habitat offers it as a week-long trip where you start out by flying into Kodiak. You're met by your leader. You're met by a leader there. You spend some time exploring around Kodiak before your flight over to Katmai National Park. And this particular trip concentrates on this area of coastline. And that's going to be really important because it's still part of Katmai National Park, but it's a different experience, and I think it's one that complements the one at Brooks Falls. But understanding that it's a little bit more adventurous and it's a deeper kind of Alaska, and I'll explain that here as we go. It's a magnificent experience, and I always look forward to an opportunity to get out to the coast of Katmai because of all it has to offer, as well as the brown bears. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that. So brown bears in general, again, I mentioned earlier, I can't imagine a better animal to learn about its landscape through than, say, a bear. And especially if you're learning about the coast of Alaska, a place where salmon come in, and the day changes throughout, the tide changes, the weather changes. There's one animal in the summertime that makes its living out there no matter what's going on around it, and that's the brown bear, or the coastal brown bear. Some in the interior we'd call it the grizzly bear. But these animals are magnificent in the way they tune in to the natural cycle of things. This is a female brown bear digging for clams out on the coast as the tide recedes, leaving some open beaches for this bear to walk along, digging up clams. Sometimes they'll be digging up little sand lances, tiny little fishes that live in the sand as well. One of the more important things about this particular photograph, not only does it show you the perspective of what it's like to be out on the beach with these animals, but it also shows one of the boats we use. This is the MV Waters sitting there in the distance. She sits at about, I want to say about 100 feet long. She's a converted tugboat. This is a real Alaskan experience. To have a chance to fly out with a bush plane or float plane, land, make your transfer onto this particular vessel, and then travel along the coastline and exploring the coastline and then getting out and exploring by smaller boat and going ashore. This is an amazing opportunity. It reminds me when I first moved to Alaska. I got to spend some time, 2 summers actually, working in Prince William Sound studying river otters, and I stayed and worked off a vessel very similar to this. As we explored that coastline and did our research, again, it's not the fanciest boat in the world, but it's a very comfortable boat. You can count on it being warm and dry, and also along with that, good meals. One of the things about staying out long, on those long Alaskan days, is the food always tastes better as well. So I couldn't think of a better base of operations for exploring the coastline than, say, in one of the boats that we charter with, say either the Waters. Sometimes we even bring another vessel in, the Kodiak, to help us with our trips along that area of the coastline. And this is for somebody looking for a real Alaskan type of experience. It's I'll promise a little bit less and say there's no frills, but it's very comfortable, very safe. These an excellent crews. These guys take very good care of you. But it is a little bit more adventurous. Let's explore that a little bit longer, a little bit more. Now I mentioned that earlier on we were here at Brooks Camp. There's actually tourism development infrastructure with Brooks Lodge, ranger station, the boardwalk system and trail system, so you can get a chance to see the bears up there. It's relatively level, about a mile out to the falls, a mile back from camp each day. But out here on the coast, this is true wilderness. There's not much here. You can see there's a small little ranger patrol cabin out here, and there's a couple of small, tiny little inn holdings here, but for the most part, cruising along the coastline by boat gives you access to places like Hallow Bay, Kodiak Bay, Geographic Harbor, and you've got all this amazing coastline to explore and go, and not only just to see bears in different situations, but explore what else might be going on in the area as far as the natural history. Are the salmon running? Are the bears digging for clams? Are they grazing on the sedges? And as the season changes, the bears tune into this as well. Where some years they might be over here, sometimes a year they might be over here feeding on sedges, and a good salmon run comes in over in Kodiak, they move over and start feeding off the salmon. So it gives you a lot of flexibility if you're a little bit more adventurous and you don't mind staying on one of those vessels. It gives you opportunity to cruise along the coastline, go into multiple places, and explore what this coastline is about. So again, flying from Kodiak down here across to the north and making your way in, the plane will catch up with wherever the vessel's anchored up, sometimes back here in Kodiak, maybe in Hallow Bay, depending on the weather. You get a chance to catch up with the vessel, and that's where you start off your adventure. So let's go ahead and explore a little bit more into this trip. And again, the MV Waters or the MV Kodiak are kind of your base for exploration. The real key is having access to a skiff, something that can get you in close to shore. You can drag the boat up onto shore so people can wade in fairly close to shore. Sometimes it might be a foot or two of water, like in this particular case, and it gives you an opportunity to get right on land with the bears, get right on land, get into the landscape with the animals themselves. And let me point out something here. On the far right there, Brad Joseph is one of the key players in this. One of the, I have to say, if I were going to the Katmai coast and I had to spend it with one guide, one person to open up this experience, I'd have to say that person would be Brad. This guy knows this area intimately, knows many of the bears intimately, and can give you incredible insights into what this landscape has to offer. And I'll make another little mention about the importance of guides when traveling to Alaska. But for some place like the coast of Katmai, you want somebody that knows what they're doing, and I can't think of a better guide than, say, Brad Josephs in this particular case. And this would be an example of one of the skiffs we might use to make our landing on shore. And you can see, for travelers, it's a little bit more adventurous because it does mean getting in and out of a boat like this. Sometimes it might be raining, sometimes it might be a sunny day, easy to do, other times it might be a little bit slippery because of the mud. So it's a little bit more adventurous, but the staff there are definitely, whether it's the guides like Brad or the crew from the boat, they're all there to help you out with that, but they are very good at what they do. So let's go ahead and explore a little bit more. Again, I mentioned this is a place where we don't have the access to platforms. This is, you're meeting the bears on their terms, which could be intertidal beaches like this, river deltas, stream deltas like this, where they flow out into the bay. And this is where the bears are making a living. You're right there among them as they're, searching for food. That's the primary reason for the bears being concentrated along this coastline during the summertime, is their access to the wealth of resources, whether it be salmon or small fishes like the sand lances, sometimes marine mammals washing up on the beach that have been beached or dead. That could become a resource for them, as well as the sedge grasses that grow along these riparian or these estuary resources areas. So let's go ahead and continue on. And when things are correct, and when things are right and the salmon are in, that's when the fishing is good. And usually that's when you're right there at their level. You're not up on a platform in this particular situation, but you're watching them making a living right at their level. And by going in a small group, behaving appropriately, respectfully, you're allowed opportunities to see this happening right at eye level with these particular bears. And I should mention that the group size for the coastal Katmai trip is a little bit smaller. I think it's usually about 6 people. There's shared staterooms and bathroom facilities on the boat, but these small groups really do facilitate these more intimate opportunities for bear viewing and just kicking back and enjoying the landscape that Alaska has to offer along this coastline. The first time I had a chance to, it's probably been about 11 years now, the first time I had a chance to go out to the coast of Katmai and experience this opportunity, I forgot about how deep Alaska could be, or how far into it you can go and feel like you're the only one on this planet and you're outnumbered by bears. And I couldn't think of a better place to do it than somewhere along this southern coast of Katmai National Park. So with that, by spending the time, learning through the bear's eyes, you get incredible insight into this convergence of a marine ecosystem, the resources of that, and this incredibly vast landscape where these animals normally spread themselves out over during the better part of the year as they concentrate on this coastline. And I've learned so much from bears. I've never gotten tired of being on the ground with bears and learning what they have to share with their world. And as many times as I go out there, there are always new surprises, no matter whether it's on the Katmai coast or at Brooks Lodge or in Denali. Amazing opportunities to learn from bears if we take the time, give them their space, and share their world in a respectful fashion. But, we're lucky because even along the Katmai coast, there may be some other opportunities for wildlife watching, whether it be some of the other marine mammals, harbor seals, in this case, a harbor seal just taking a break, lounging on an intertidal rock as the tide is going out from underneath them. But you may see sea lions, you may, on an opportunity, see a whale, possibly there's a chance for sea otters as well. And who knows what you might see over the landscape, but also if you're a birder, there's a chance for new birds as well, whether it be a ruddy turnstone or possibly oyster catchers. The coast of Katmai can be a great place for other wildlife too, but really I would expect people to go out there with a focus on learning about bears, experiencing bears up close and personal along the Katmai coastline. So with that, not only does the coast have amazing wildlife opportunities, but also the landscape as well. On the few clear days, the few stellar days we get along that coastline, you get grand views of glaciers and glacier-clad peaks, as well as the green open landscape surrounding those. So I invite you, if you're ever interested in, in a deeper experience like this, the coast of Katmai is a great opportunity to do that as well. So let's go ahead and cruise on in. Let's talk a little bit more about how to experience this, and kind of, I guess I got to borrow a lot from Natural Habitat Adventures philosophy on nature tours, and that's going with small groups, anywhere from maybe 6 people on the waters or on the boat that cruises along the Katmai coast to maybe 12 or 14 people traveling through Alaska on our more extensive Alaska trip from Denali down to Kenai Fjords and out to Katmai. Small groups, are a great way to go. I love the energy that each person brings to a group and allows you to, with the questions they have, the insights they can share, allows you to go much deeper into the experience, whether you're in Denali or along the coast or you're talking about bears. Everybody's input is important and it adds to the trip. Small groups keeps it a positive flow as well and gives you the maximum flexibility for getting around, seeing what you can see, and having that interplay. So along with small groups, having a good guide, Natural Habitat Adventures, it's a big part of what we do. What we pay attention to is making sure we've got the best guides out there on the ground to share the experience with. And not only just our expedition leaders that take you and lead you on these trips, but also the quality of the local guides. We kind of allow you to have a chance to experience. Like here, Emmett Peters Jr., taking people on a nature hike. Here's a young Athabascan gentleman who's a dog musher, has intimate knowledge of learning from the landscape, living off the landscape from his village, going out to have an opportunity to go out on a trail with somebody like this. Most people would go to Alaska wouldn't have an opportunity to meet an Athabascan guide or an Athabascan person to have a chance to experience up close and personal the way they made a living off this landscape. And anytime, I can tell you from experience, anytime you're out with a natural habitat expedition leader, they'll be working with you to bring in some of this local knowledge, some of this local insight into the trip. So it's another part about, group travel can work to your benefit, where a lot of people traveling through the landscape wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity. Also, a good guide will help you be prepared for any situation, whether it's the rain and mud, or in this case, just getting booted up for a river trip. Great opportunity to have you prepared and talk to you about what to expect from one aspect of the trip to the other. And yeah, when we're talking about Alaska, we have to talk about mosquitoes or insects. And I'll bring that back up a little bit here in timing, but being prepared, there's, in Alaska we have a saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, it's just bad clothing. Likewise for insects. If I stayed indoors every time I felt that there were too many mosquitoes or black flies, I probably wouldn't have seen probably 60% of what I experienced in Alaska over the years. So just being prepared to get out with the proper clothing, the proper attire, gives you that opportunity to experience things and kind of shirk it off a little bit. And it's not always bad. On our trips to Alaska, there's usually only a few little places where you have to worry about insects, and it's usually for a small part of the time. Timing of the season can make more of a difference in that regard. So when is the best time to travel to Alaska? Well, I can tell you that Natural Habitat Adventures schedules their Alaska departures, the ultimate Alaska trips, surround the time when the bears visit Brooks Falls. They come in greater numbers for the arrival of the salmon. And those trips have 2 different time frames. There's the trips that start in June and run through July. That's when the salmon are coming up through the system, and that's when they're going to be pulling up and jumping at the falls. Now, they're not jumping every moment of every day. They come in waves and build up in numbers, and they start making their jumps. So by going out to Brooks Lodge for a couple of days, and July is a great opportunity to be there for when those salmon start jumping and the bears are gathered to feed on them. Now, there's another time where we do the Alaska trip for a couple of different reasons, and that's in late summer, and starts in August and runs into early September. And that can be a great time because what happens then is the salmon that have spawned gone upstream, they've spawned, they're already starting to wash back down through the system. They've spawned out, they don't have the energy anymore, they're dying, and almost any bear can make a living off those salmon. They're no longer jumping at the falls, but they're washing down through the system, and that's when you tend to see more of the moms with their cubs come in, because shoot, those fish are so slow, the ones that are still alive are so slow. I could even wade out in the river. I would never do this, but I could even wade out into the river and grab one of those fish with my mouth. And I don't have, well, maybe I do have a larger mouth than what I think, but even that time of year, I could catch a salmon in my mouth. So a mother or an inexperienced bear like a cub or a young adult, this would be a great opportunity for them to be at Brooks Falls to take advantage of that resources that's washing back down through the system. So that time of year, even though you don't have the salmon jumping at the falls, it can be a great gathering of bears, especially for moms and cubs and up close and personal. This is just walking along the beach right by Brooks Lodge there. So our trips are scheduled around the concentration of wildlife. With this Ultimate Alaska, having opportunities for early summer arrival of the salmon going up through the system, and then later with the salmon washing out and coming back down through the system. A couple other things that go along with timing. How about if you're interested in the baby animals, the small animals, the calf moose or the calf caribou, I'd recommend the June, July departures. They tend to be better time of year for the small mammals because they're going to grow fast. A young moose calf that hits the ground in, or say, 1st of June, just for easy math, by the time mid-October comes around, that moose calf might have been born at 30 pounds. By the time mid-October comes around, that same moose calf is going to weigh 300 pounds. That's a short couple of months to do a lot of growing. So by the end of the summer, they're not going to look quite as young. They're not going to be quite as cuddly looking or quite as easy to photograph as small baby animals. So if you're interested in small baby animals, the earlier trips in the summer. Likewise, how about wildflowers? If you're interested in wildflowers, those June, July departures tend to have the best wildflower blooms. Now, there are some later wildflowers that bloom later on in the year you can pick up in late summer, like fireweed down on the Kenai Peninsula. You also, in the late part of the year towards as you get into late August, September, you start getting autumn foliage in Denali, which can be absolutely spectacular too. So if you're thinking about views of Denali, again, anytime's an opportunity, but usually tend to have clearer views of Mount McKinley or Denali later on in the summer as the air tends to cool off and it carries less moisture, and that's when you tend to get your less occluded views of Denali or Mount McKinley at that time of year. So whatever your timing, whatever your reasons for going to Alaska, I invite you to explore it a little bit deeper. Go to the books, learn a little bit more about what's going on, watch the videos, learn as much as you can about Alaska, and take from it an opportunity to explore a vast landscape with amazing vast resources. We talk about the wildlife, the natural history, and I hope that our travels bring us together sometime. That would be great if it did that in Alaska, maybe some other place in the world. But I look forward to sharing more time with you and answering some questions here. So in closing, again, remember, we covered 3 different areas. We covered the interior through Denali National Park and what that experience has to offer, the richness of the coastline with Kenai Fjords National Park, and then we scooted out to Katmai National Park to talk more about the bears and the coastal brown bears and how they make a living on that landscape and maybe some of the best ways to experience that. So we also talked a little bit over the course of this, the modes of travel from the buses to the planes, the boats, and you know, the modes of travel through Alaska. We mentioned a little bit about the lodging and the importance of good guides while traveling around Alaska. So with that, why don't I go ahead and close up now and give you guys a chance to continue those questions. If you have questions that we can't answer here today, we do keep a list of them, and I know the adventure specialists go through and try to follow up on as many as possible if we don't get to them here. And you can always call in and talk to an adventure specialist. If you have one already, great. If just give a call. If you don't have one, they'll set you up with somebody that can help answer some of your questions for you. And thanks, Lee, for all the technical setup on that side. Megan, for your support as well in the office. And hey, I got to thank the whole Natural Habitat team for helping me out. But most importantly, thank you guys for logging on today. I'm sorry about what might have seemed like a little bit of a disconnect. Hopefully we didn't miss out on too much, okay? And go ahead, Lee. I'll leave us open for questions. You there?
Okay, great. Eric, thank you so much. We have about 7 minutes here, so let's see how many questions we can get answered. This one came in early on. Are wolves a concern in the wilderness? And wondering about what sort of safety measures are in place for tours such as this.
Oh, you know, safety, that's always a good thing to consider. First off, You know, wolves, there's only been, you know, in over 100 years in Alaska, there's only been one um, person that I know of that has been killed by wolves in Alaska, and that was just a few years ago. And you know what, I've never seen the complete outcome of that particular situation. In general, any opportunity with a group to watch wolves as an opportunity to learn from and experience, you know, life right at their level. It's not something I would normally be concerned about as long as you behave appropriately. Most people get in trouble with any particular wildlife is when the respect breaks down. Primarily with wolves, it's when people feed wolves. That's when that respect from wolf to people and people to wolves break down, and you're more likely to be bit. All the opportunities I've seen where there's been a negative encounter with wolves, people have been bit trying to feed them. Or wolves have gotten food from people, come into camps and maybe do some damage to gear like tents, things like that. But usually on our trips, staying in lodges, being responsible with our food and the way we behave, we usually don't have much of an opportunity for a negative encounter. We usually look forward to it as a positive encounter.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And then the same question about safety measures taken around the bears. What sort of safety measures are taken? And does the guide carry a gun?
No, we don't carry guns on our trips for a couple of different reasons. Number one, we never want to put ourselves in that situation where you would have to rely on a gun to suppress an encounter with a bear. And opportunities where we're close with bears, we're carrying bear spray, which is by most people, most tests has shown to be more efficient with deterring negative bear encounters, but also in really bear dense environments where we have a lot of bears and the potential for a lot more encounters. We carry flares, rescue flares, which can also be a great deterrent without compromising a group to something like the bear spray blowing back into them and causing respiratory arrest or distress in any particular situation. But the behavior of the group and traveling a group is one of the most important things you can do while in bear country. Another reason why I think you're always safer when you're traveling in bear country is if you're with a group, you're making more noise, you're less likely to surprise and have a surprise encounter. You're also more of a deterrent because very few bears will make an aggressive approach on a group of 3 or more. That's been pretty well documented, but also the way a group behaves will also help deter any negative encounters with bears. So there are places where people will go and carry firearms, primarily state preserves, things like that, non-national park destinations where they'll carry a firearm for bear protection. In most of those cases, they've never ever had to use them. McNeil River Bear Sanctuary would be a good example. If anybody wanted to look up more, look at the strategy and techniques McNeil River Bear Sanctuary uses, and they do carry a firearm, but they've never had to use it. In the national parks, we don't do that, and we rely on all the other techniques.
Okay, good. All right. I think this is the last question about safety and hazards of any sort, and this is about seasickness and whether people get seasick on the boats.
Oh, you know, sometimes I've had people get seasick in a canoe on a little pond. Everybody's different on that. But yeah, I would encourage people because sometimes, you know, on our day trip, if the water's a little bit rough, you know, I like to keep people out on the deck where they've got good fresh air, but, you know, some boating or one of those gravel or something like that could help you if you have a specific type of medicine you like to take for seasickness. I do recommend it. I keep people out in the fresh air so they tend not to fall asleep in that particular situation too. And you get more, the more you're looking at the landscape, the more you're looking off in the horizon, less likely you are to get sick. But if the seas are rough and you're kind of sitting inside the cabin of the boat, staying dry or something like that, it might get you a little bit. And on occasion, I have a few people get seasick for a small portion of the day, especially making rougher water around the Cape on our trip around Kenai Fjords National Park. But for the most part, most people rally really quickly and enjoy the rest of the trip. But everybody's different, and it can change from day to day. Boy, you know, I'm sure there's some days where I can get pretty close to being seasick, but, you know, that has to be a pretty rough day, but each person is a little bit different. But it is a concern. If anybody's really particular about it, we can definitely help out with different measures once it happens too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Pat's with us, commented, I noticed people sitting on camp stools on the shore. Does NatHab supply those?
Yes, that's on the Kenai Fjord, or on the Katmai Coast trip, absolutely. You know, we're constantly looking for better, more comfortable, and adaptable means to do that. And yeah, most of those were kind of like 5-gallon buckets, like pickle buckets almost, with sometimes they have a pad on them, sometimes not, because you need to be fairly mobile. It's nice to be able to sit down and enjoy and watch and photograph from those, but we're constantly working on different types of seats so people can get up and we can move to a better location for viewing, or just to maybe move out of the way of a bear that might want to move through an area. So right now, I think most of those photos showed people sitting on something like a pickle bucket, but it works and it's easy to move and help people reposition themselves on it. But that's, yes, we do provide those and we're very workable on that. And maybe by next summer we might even have a better solution to that. But right now that seems to be pretty good because you can carry some of your gear in it as well as set up nice and comfortable somewhere.
Okay, very good. A couple questions here about August. Just a question about what the benefits are, again, of going in August and whether the cubs are still in their really cute stage in August.
Yeah, you know, there's different levels of, as a biologist, I'd probably say there's different levels of cuteness. But you know, I'd have to say, yeah, in some bears, each mom's different, each cub is a little bit different. Some tend to grow faster. Even within a litter of cubs from that particular year, there can be quite a bit of difference by that time of year where the small little runt, if it can be much, much smaller, much more cubbier than its older siblings. That's always a possibility. But, oh, yeah, I'd have to say, you know, in short, yes, they're still cute at that time of year.
Okay, great. And other good reasons to go in August, what would those be?
You know, I love the cold, crisp air that can accompany August in the interior. It's just, you know, you get that bite of what feels like winter is around the corner. And the first time, if you've ever had a chance to be in Alaska for the first winter, and then ever since that point on, and when you feel that particular bite of autumn as it comes into the air, the crispness, the breeze on your cheek, you hear the rustling of the aspen trees and the leaves falling off the trees, you can actually hear that in the forest. To me, that's one of my favorite things. But the big bulls, the elk, the caribou, the moose are all in prime. The Dall sheep are ready for winter because it can happen. Autumn can last 5 days. It can last 3 weeks in the interior of Alaska. That's how fickle it can be. But it's that changing point is the magical time for me. And the animals looking their best, ready to take on winter.
That sounds wonderful. We have a few more questions. I'm going to go just a little bit past the hour because I want to get as many of these answered as we can. We'll just maybe go for another 2 or 3 minutes. There's a question here, Eric, about whether you would still go on most of the excursions even in inclement weather.
Yes, the only, you know, right off the bat, the only one I can think, you know, I don't let the only time I'll let weather determine whether or not we cancel an opportunity to get out is if it comes down to safety. You know, and one of those places where that would happen, and I think that the company we work with in the Kenai Fjords area out at Katmai Bay, or sorry, not Katmai Bay, out at Resurrection Bay, the company we work with are really good at understanding that you put a small boat into really rough waters, especially towards August, September, when the seas tend to be a little bit rougher coming in from the south. That can be dangerous, and nobody wants to get injured or have a mishap out on a wilderness coastline like the Kenai Fjords area like that. So that's one area where we'll definitely take that into consideration. But when it comes down, it starts threatening safety and welfare of the travelers, absolutely. But otherwise, you know what? Some of my best hikes have been in the rain, and sometimes, you know, life takes on a different feel when you're out, maybe on a breezy day on a ridge overlooking Wonder Lake. So again, as long as it doesn't interfere with safety, we'll pretty much do it.
Okay, good. Is there an age requirement, lower age limit, or I guess upper, for taking these trips?
You know, that's a good question to pass on to the staff at the office. You know, I tend to look at, you know, my unofficial answer for that one is, you know, I can act pretty young sometimes. I hope I don't act too young that people want to throw me off my own trip. But at the same time, young people can be, you know, there are a lot of young people out there who are much more mature. So I tend to look at individuals' behaviors and, you know, what they're going to get from the trip more than anything else. You know, I don't mind taking anybody as long as they're, you know, if I could take I have no problems with younger people. The trick is it going to be something they're going to gain? Are they going to be able to gain from the trip? And likewise, and maybe help enhance the experience for everybody else. I love working with younger people that can help enhance other people's appreciation, especially older people's appreciation for the landscape and for the wildlife and the nature.
Yeah, true.
Chronological
Okay.
age. I'll leave that to the office.
Okay. I just want to tell you hello from Patty B., who traveled with you in Churchill in November. She's been listening today.
Excellent.
Yes, and we'll make this the last question. There was just a request for you to recap the trips that you talked about today in terms of area and departure
absolutely
date.
no problem. I'll try to do that as quick as possible, too.
Okay.
Okay. In Alaska, like on our Ultimate Alaska trip, it's a 2-week trip that starts in Fairbanks. We usually visit the interior of Alaska, most of that right around Denali National Park. Out in the Kantishna area, so right in the heart of the park and preserve, so we can explore around out there. We make that journey, a couple days journey down to the coast to experience the richness of the Alaska coastline through Kenai Fjords National Park. That's where the more potential for marine mammals, pelagic birds like the puffins and kittiwakes and things like that we talked about along the trip. And then we make our way out in that particular trip out to Brooks Lodge for the bear experience, or experiencing bears in the Katmai National Park, primarily coming to feed on the richness of the salmon, the sockeye salmon that come into that area to spawn in the summertime. And then the other trip I talked about was the ultimate grizzly experience, where you go out and that was a more adventurous one along the Alaska Katmai coast, where you fly out of Kodiak, and that's a 1-week trip where you go along the coastline there and visit the coastline with the primary purpose of spending time in close proximity at eye level with coastal brown bears. And I think that covers the trips I talked about pretty well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today, Eric. I just want to remind our audience that we will be offering our next in the Wildlife webinar series on Tuesday, January 22nd at 3 p.m., same time as we did today. So, Eric, I will turn it over to you at this point for anything else you would like to share before we close.
No, thank you to everybody. Patty B also for sharing your time today, but thank you to everybody for logging on. This is kind of new technology for me, but I'm enjoying it. It gives me a chance to talk about one of my favorite places, Alaska, and thank you guys for giving me that opportunity, okay? Again, feel free, if you see me out on the trail, wave me down, say hello, and let's share a conversation, okay? And thank you guys for making it all possible. Bye-bye.